Amy.
I believe it. Also, just like that, you're a single parent with a baby.
Well, the other thing. This is. She hasn't. He's.
Yeah, that was the one, I can't thank my wife enough. She put all those things, password, all this stuff in a 3-ring binder. I had that when she passed away.
Okay, but that's because of the ideas, they would access it.
Right. That's for your wife. Well, it's for me. It's true. I don't know. Because I have many.
We have 7 o'clock. We'll call a meeting to order. Roll call.
We have 25 present and 5 absent.
Thank you. Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. Mary Roberts, could you lead us tonight?
I just put some cashews in my. That's my dinner. Let me swallow.
Oh, sure, certainly.
Now I can. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of
of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
liberty and justice for all.
liberty and justice.
Moment of silence to contemplate what we're doing tonight, and also a moment of silence for Supervisor Winicke's daughter. Thank you. And Mr. Lindell is excused tonight. Okay. Are we in compliance with the open meetings law?
We are, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I need a motion to approve the agenda. So moved by Supervisor Schultz. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Johns. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed?
Aye.
The agenda is approved. Approval of the December 14th, 2021 meeting minutes. Supervisor Brogler, you want to do that? Is Amy online? I do not. Okay.
I'll move for the approval of the minutes.
Second.
Second by Supervisor Jaco. Any questions, additions, subtractions? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, the meeting minutes are approved. Communications. Treasurer's report. And zoning committee. And the treasurer's report, I believe, would be on your desk, and in the public hearing for the for zoning. Special order of business, Mr. Waymeyer.
Sorry, we're just trying to get the supervisor online, so we'll get this started.
So tonight, it was an opportunity that we needed to update the Tyler County Board as we continue the process to look at the project related to the courthouse, sheriff operation, and the jail. And as we've talked through, we're going through various phases of the design process, and we initially started what was called the schematic design phase. And if you recall, at our November meeting, we had a meeting to really discuss where that design had led us with that initial draft, along with an updated budget. As we've gone through the process, we are all moving to what's called the design development phase. And in essence, that phase is really a much more detailed design process. And this started mid-November. This is expected to take us till mid-March. So really around that 50% mark of final design of where we're going before construction drawings start really being developed for bid processes and the architect stuff and the engineering going forward. And so I bring that forward because obviously there continues to be a lot of conversations. And so parts of the building at various levels of this right now. So literally there are some offices that the architect team is looking at how to size furniture, how does that fit in, where do we put Cat 6 drops and electrical drops, all those kind of things. But in some other aspects, there are some things that are coming up as we continue to look at operational needs related to ongoing functions of the county, not only for today, but for the future. And so Potter Lawson has met with every single department to look at where they're at. And in general, all those departments have looked at with the schematic design, either validated it or asked for some small changes. In most cases where those changes took place, it did not increase the scope of space and or a budgetary standpoint. Our two main users, we'll call it, heavy users that are unique users, are our courts and sheriff's department. And they've been spending a lot of time with those two, and there's still some more meetings to come to make sure what we have put into place for renovations and additions meet the needs both not only of our local officials, but as a reminder, Department of Corrections and also representatives of the 3rd District Court on behalf of the Supreme Court have to approve our design changes for those respective operations. And so one of those items as we continue to look of the size and scope relates specifically to the Sheriff's Department. That's primarily what we're going to be talking about tonight. And we're going to kind of talk through the processes, how we got to where we're at today, and some of the decision points were before you as a county board tonight. So as you will see in some of the diagrams in our schematic design phase, we had identified a bubble by the Sheriff's Department, and really it was down in the jail operations to look at support needs. Really focus on, we'll talk more of those support needs related to mental health, medical clinics, programs related to counseling, GED, things like that Captain Gray will get into a little bit more. And so we're going to talk through how we got there with design development and what does that mean from a cost standpoint. We also want to just make you a heads up there. We continue to be design reviews in terms of things inside the building that might be drivers. So example, we spent some time talking today about doors. And who would have thought doors have been such an exciting conversation and how that can drive cost. But it's something as we go through this process, we'll continue to update the committee, meaning buildings, grounds, and finance, but also county board if those are some decision drivers. But we'll make sure you understand there's a couple other things out there too, but nothing to the magnitude that we're going to be talking about tonight, because this involves an addition to the addition. So when this came forward, we did meet with the Buildings and Grounds Committee in December to give them the update of where it looked like the needs were heading on this design. And when this was presented, they all agreed that in many ways this was a big decision, that more than just the Buildings and Grounds Committee and staff and our consultants need to be involved in that conversation. And so as we went through that process, we thought it was prudent at that point in time to have a joint committee meeting shortly thereafter, which involved the Finance Committee, who also are overseeing the budget related to this project. And so on January 6th, a joint meeting of the Finance Committee and the Buildings and Grounds were met. And for those who were in attendance and able to meet the meeting, unanimously that group who was present said they reckon moving forward with this addition for many reasons that you will hear tonight. And so this kind of going back in time, I just want to quickly touch on the schematic design phase specific to this area. And as we went through this, there's various needs for the jail support functions. This does not really impact actually the area that we hold prisoners, but really how do we provide program and care for those folks in the jail. And so on your drawings, unfortunately, I realized the copies I gave you in-house are black and white. The ones I sent you are in color. So when you go back to your computers, take a look. The team kind of identified two potential areas. Could we have a small little addition put on there? One was right at the south end of our main level that's adjacent to where our medical facilities primary are. And as we begin to analyze that area, we began to realize there's a small problem. And that problem was every major utility that feeds the building went through right in that spot. And those who have been involved with utility relocations realize that's very expensive to do. And so when they started doing initial pricing per square foot, an addition of this magnitude got costly very quickly. The other spot they were trying to see that could be adjacent to our medical area, which is in this area up in here, and you'll see it in your packet too, was could we fill this little gap here? You may wonder why. Why do we have a gap between this area here and the offices here? So without seeing the full picture, this is the tail end of what's called our pot system. This is actually where we hold the prisoners in the county jail. And one of our requirements is that we need to provide daylight to those who are in prison. And so this space actually provided that daylight for the folks who are in those pods, as we refer to it as. And so that was not a functionality that could really work. And so this kind of ended here for a time frame, but really came back of looking at those needs that continue to be out there, the future needs. And so with that being said, we also thought it was important that you hear some of those ongoing challenges and needs from the Sheriff's Department. So tonight, the first part to talk about the operations overview, I'm going to invite Captain Gray, who's our jail administrator, come up along with our Sheriff Paul Milbrath, and they're kind of talking about just kind of a quick education of how our jail operates in terms of capacity, where we're at pre-COVID versus current status, talk about state inmates a little bit, but then also the needs of programming and some of the things that have changed over time. And so I'm going to let Captain Gray start first, and then Sheriff Milbrath will follow up with final comments related to this slide, and then we'll move on to Potter Lawson and talk about some of the design change. So Captain Gray.
Thank you, Administrator Waymeyer. County Board, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Captain Gray. I'm the current jail administrator for the Jefferson County Jail. I've been with the Sheriff's Office for 28 years, started my career in the jail for 3.5 years, and have now come full circle and back in the jail as the jail administrator for the past coming on 2.5 years. In that time, there's been a huge change in not only the jail, but the jail population. The inmates that we used to deal with back in '94 when I was down there were considerably different than what they are today. I found that in this brief amount of time that I've been back as a jail administrator, there's a lot of issues, a lot of medical issues that relate to addiction, mental health, and just overall medical issues themselves. So as we were going through these plans and trying to develop the most functional use of the space that we had, we kept shifting things around and trying to figure out what was going to work best. If you looked at the plans, we have only 5 holding cells in the jail right now. Every morning when I come in, those holding cells are full. The holding cells, we utilize them for individuals that are going through withdrawals, mental health, and medical. And we have a lot of that down in the jail. So 5 holding cells just isn't enough. So in this plan, we incorporated some additional cells. That gives us the ability to observe them, do our required 15-minute checks, do our required 30-minute checks, and deal with those that are combative. The cells, the location that they're in, they're very visible to the staff, and the staff make sure that they get there and do their checks as required. Currently, our jail has a capacity of 229 beds. Today, we have 115 inmates. The reason why we're down to 115 is because of COVID. We're trying to eliminate transmission of COVID amongst the inmate population. Prior to COVID, pre-COVID, we were averaging about 185 inmates within our facility. At that time, we also had about 28 is our contract with the state. The state did pull those 28 inmates out, so at this point, we're down to 115. Having the state inmates in our facility generated revenue for the county, and it would range anywhere from $500,000 to $750,000 a year. Without those inmates in our facility, we don't have that revenue. We're looking at making some improvements to help bring some of these inmates back and maybe even bring a few more back once we get to that point. In addition, we've also been approached by a federal agency asking if we would be willing to start housing some federal inmates under the Homeland Security. At this point, they've asked us to do 5 from the O'Hare International Airport and then 5 that come off the street. We're still working towards meeting the requirements and the standards that they've asked us to meet. Moving on, with those holding cells being full all the time, we have to find a way to alleviate some of the mental health issues that we're dealing with, some of the drug abuse issues that we're dealing with. I also used to run our drug task force, so I know a lot about the issues with the drug dependency and how it's a continuous recidivism with addiction. If we can find enough space and utilize some of the space within our facility to help with some of these issues with addiction, with some of these issues with mental health, I think that we can maybe protect the inmates themselves from themselves and protect the staff as well. Because when we're dealing with mental health issues within the facility, we're also putting ourselves at risk each time that we have to intervene in a mental health situation. So some of the programs that we do have in our facility that we try to utilize are the GED program. I know Administrator Waymeyer had mentioned that. Currently, because of COVID, we're utilizing virtual GED. So at this time, we have 1, maybe 2 individuals that are utilizing the multipurpose room to get their education, get their GED, HSEDs. Pre-COVID, we had 10 plus, even more in the multipurpose room taking classes with our instructors. We've also brought in OSHA certification. OSHA 10 is a class that gets individuals ready to work within a factory, any environment where OSHA oversees the product and the productivity. We've had several graduate with OSHA certificates, and in fact, once they graduate, they are looked at and possibly hired by factories within our communities. So that is a benefit as well. We've got other literacy programs that we use these multipurpose rooms for. We also, on the side of the addiction, we put on AODA, AA, NA programs for those that have addiction and try to get these individuals to understand their addiction and try to work through it so that they're not coming back into our facilities. For individuals that have anger issues, domestic abuse issues, mental health issues, we also provide parent counseling from Human Services and through our own counseling services on how to be a better parent. We have religious services, Bible studies for individuals to participate in. We also have speakers who come in and speak about life lessons, individuals that were in the same situation that the inmates were in. So we utilize these areas quite frequently, especially pre-pandemic, when we could get everybody into the multi-purpose room and jointly partake in these programs. With the mental health issues, being confined in a jail is kind of like cabin fever. I know in the middle of the winter when I can't get outside and I can't get some of that fresh air or some of that daylight, I kind of go stir crazy, get a little agitated, a little edgy. My husband points that out every once in a while. But if we could get approval for an outdoor rec area, that would help us maybe bring some of this mental health issues down and help these individuals cope with their situation, focus better on what they're in for, and maybe help them overcome some of the mental health issues. Not only would that help them, but it would also help protect our staff. Because mental health issues, if you have seen some of the issues down in the jail, some of our staff have to go hands-on at times to help protect the individual from themselves. And every time we go hands-on with an individual, we're putting ourselves at risk as well for injury within our facilities. At this time, I think that's pretty much all I have, unless I think the sheriff will cover everything else.
Good evening. Captain Gray explained a lot of this to you, and I wanted her to be the one to actually do it because she's there every day. The other person in the back of this room is Chief Deputy Parker, who has actually spent more time down there, over not as currently, but he is probably the second most able person to explain a lot of the issues, should you have any. He's there during the day. You have a question, stop by our office, talk to him. I, Captain Gray, we are there to answer your questions. We realize this is an expensive project. And I know you're well aware of that. But I guess a couple of things that I really want to implore you. I know I've had board members explain to me in the past that it's our job to spend money, but it's to spend it wisely. And the one thing I don't want to see is us do what we did in our old building. When we built it, it was too small the day we moved in. We ended up tearing out and putting in storage spaces where offices were. I'm hoping this time we've really, really looked very clearly and hard at issues. Our design team, I couldn't be happier. I spent a lot of time with them today, and it was good. We were able to do a lot with the upstairs portion of the sheriff's office design to make it not just for now, but for future. Now again, we're in the same blue footprint. We're not moving. But we've been able to figure out ways to retrofit, to move things, to better utilize what we have. And it turned out well, and it's for the future. We didn't just plan for, well, maybe this person or what we have right now, because let's be honest, those of you that were here when we put the last dispatch center together and we moved it, how many years do you remember that we were going to be there? 5. 5 years. It's 15. We did a good job with it. And it was well thought through, but we knew it was never going to be a 5-year issue. We knew that we'd be there a lot longer. But one of the things that I do want to impress upon us as well, DOC, the Department of Corrections, a lot of acronyms out there, I'll try not to use them, but the Department of Corrections has come in the past and said, your health area is really too small. It's too small. You need to add more hours. You need to add more staff. You need to have the better ability to do these things. And we've been working really diligently to make that happen. And a lot of the things today that we sat down with the chief, Margot, and I think we really hit a lot of those issues. And it is nice to have someone with the chief's experience and Margot's present day experience in that room stating, well, that'll work or this won't work, but let's try, So it's been very, very helpful. Again, I don't want to belabor the point. I know this is a lot of money. I know we're asking for probably a little extra. But I just want to do it right the first time. We're going to be there a long time. I know that. And we've come a long way. I don't think necessarily our space needs will grow necessarily for inmate need in terms of a number of inmates, because we may come up with, we're actually using more electronic monitoring now than we have in the past. And so there's other ways we can do things. But I think it's really important that we realize the mental health aspect of these inmates. These are not people that have good coping skills. We spend an inordinate amount of time dealing with this. And I think what we're really working on here and what we've been working on diligently is a plan that will give us a future and a much longer future for this building than we could presently hope for. I think it's wise to spend our money up front, doing it right, versus in a couple years deciding, wow, we got to tear a hole, we got to break a wall out, we got to do something. It's not a wise use of our money, and I know that's your job to spend it wisely. So I ask you for your support on this, and if you have questions, anybody will be happy, but those two people and myself will be happy to do whatever we can. And if you want a tour, all you got to do is ask. You come on and we'll make sure you get a tour. All right, thank you.
So this is unfolding now. It's talking about the needs is how do we program that space needs? And so that's really getting into the changes of the design from the schematic design to the design and development phase. And so just a quick snapshot what this is looking like as our Ron from Power Loss will be coming up is really looking at the site plan overview. And you may recall as a quick snapshot, this is what the new addition by the law enforcement jail area was looking like. And this is currently where the Judges Park, and eventually we were changing where that's going to a more secure spot. And then as you see on the right, the most recent, you'll see that slight addition, and each level is about 1,000 square feet. So 2,000 overall, and that's at movement to a little bit to the north. So we'll move on now to the updated level. So a quick thing for your packets, while Ron will talk through the different things in a more detail. On the left on this drawing is the schematic. So this is the original drawing, and on the right is the design development. You'll see an asterisk next to this page. In your packets, right behind it is a more full page drawing, so you can see in more detail versus a quick snapshot of here. So that's why we're using this for examples. So with that being said, we're going to kind of turn to the nice color coded here, and Ron's going to kind of talk through some of the things, and if you need to go back and forth, you can.
Good evening, everyone. As Ben had mentioned, there has been a lot of discussion back and forth with staff, with the sheriff and his staff. Today alone was 4 or 5 hours meeting and working through a lot of these spaces. So this will continue. We've scheduled another meeting for next week. We'll continue to work with them and keep working through this design process. Our goal is to really wrap up a lot of the major design elements by the 3rd week of March. So we are really just in the throes of the design component of this. So issues like this are going to arise as we move forward. So I want to briefly discuss some of the planning elements on this diagram that address some of the issues that you've heard tonight. Just to orient you in the floor plan, along this bottom side of the page here, that's the Main Street side. This is the south side of the site. As Ben had mentioned, the original addition pretty much came off of this wall right here and came around here. We're expanding basically about 25 additional feet to the north. So again, 2 floors, it's about 2,000 square feet total of addition above and beyond what you saw at the last presentation. So as also was discussed, it was very costly to try to introduce those additions up and around this corner. It was felt like if we could add on to the addition here, it's probably a much more cost-effective solution to free up some of this internal space within that ground floor plan so that we can accommodate some of those health-related programs that would be beneficial to the department. So how we did that was right now, you currently in the facility, there are the locker rooms for staff in this location here. They're not ADA compliant. They're very tight, very small. They don't accommodate a lot of the future needs. The original plan had let's try to keep those in place, knowing how tight the space was. What we decided to do in this diagram was relocate the locker rooms to this expanded portion that we're talking about on the addition. These are ADA compliant locker rooms. They meet the current needs and future needs for the county. But they would be located on the ground floor at this location right here. What that allowed us to do is it freed up some space here so that primarily we could introduce some additional program space up here in this orange area. Up in that area is where a lot of your staff is. The sergeants are there. We're trying to provide the nurse's office in that location, the nurse's exam room, medical storage, and then with this new layout, we were able to also introduce the, my mind just went blank. Thank you. The mental health office, sorry about that, mental health office up in that area. So again, trying to keep all the health-related people and staff in that location. Again, when inmates are brought back to that area, we're not bringing them all through the facility down and around these areas. They're just being brought right in past booking into this suite right here. Much more safe, much more efficient for staff to monitor that space, especially with people with mental health issues. Other components that were developed that have been addressed, I'm going to talk about this blue area right here. These 4 conference rooms, they were in the previous, one of the previous schemes that we had presented. These conference rooms get used multiple times on a daily basis. They're very critical. One of the earlier schemes to not expand was eliminating 2 of those. It caused a major problem with how the operations work in that area. So staff definitely requested that we try to maintain those 4 conference rooms in that area. It's right off of booking. Again, from a security standpoint, it makes a lot of sense from a location standpoint and efficiency standpoint for staff. The other component in the blue area, which is over here, that's the existing program space. Right now, that's 1 space. The intent here is to introduce a dividing wall, operable wall that can be open and closed, so it becomes flexible space. The idea being that you could run multiple programs in this location. Again, trying to meet some of those needs that Margot and the sheriff had discussed before. Becomes flexible space. One of the things that's been talked about is in this lower half here, you could introduce some anchored down exercise equipment, whether it's off the wall or on the floor in that corner. Again, that's a big savings from a mental health standpoint for these inmates to be able to get some of that physical exercise. So that accommodates that indoor exercise location here on the plan. From a Department of Corrections standpoint, they have criteria for square footage. Each one of these easily meets that criteria. So the idea of being able to divide that into 2 different spaces works well for that flexibility. You also have the opportunity to open that up to 1 large space, which is about just under 1,100 square feet. So it seems to be very reasonable to do. Then down in this area, it's more some additional office type space. The captain's office, we've relocated to this area in green, which is right adjacent to these conference rooms. Some of the earlier schemes had it located up here. Again, one of the things we wanted to do up here in order to get some of the functionality to work better off of booking was to get some of the clothing storage for inmates and such up in this area. Their changing area. We've also introduced an ADA toilet room up in that area during changing and a shower. That plumbing is there right now. It's just all non-ADA compliant. So again, we're required to make that ADA compliant in that location. Also then down in this area adjacent to the captain's office here is we've introduced medical records and medical record storage. So there's kind of that office component in this area. And then off of that in the yellow area is the break room and then 1 ADA compliant restroom right off the Sally Port. The reason for that, right now, a lot of the drivers, people coming into the facility after inmates are dropped off looking for a toilet facility, and rather having them wandering through the whole facility, it's right off that area. Again, that's in the secured perimeter. You don't want outside people just walking through this facility. You want to get them in and out. And again, it made a lot of sense to put those 2 spaces in this location because there's existing plumbing in that area. Again, a cost-saving measure. Let's get that toilet facility, the kitchen area in that location. Plumbing's already there because of the current use of that space with the locker rooms. There's water and plumbing and sanitary in those locations. The other component here, the last piece that you heard us talking about was that outdoor rec space. The discussion there off of this area, this is right now is the secured parking. the discussion was, let's put a wall up and around this area, have inmates be escorted down this area into a secured vestibule here, brought out into a yard at this location here. It's tucked back inside the area, creating a courtyard, more or less. The wall itself would probably be a precast concrete wall, not unlike the existing wall at the Law Enforcement Center. So the whole idea is to blend that in. We had discussions today with the Department of Corrections. They like the idea of having that introduced in that location. That corridor we are cutting through here, we are taking a little bit away from the women's Huber dorm. Shouldn't be an issue with the numbers that are worked out in that area. This space in general probably have some sort of netting over the top. There would be some sort of, haven't determined what kind of precautionary measure would be taken there, but whether it's a razor wire or something like that, it would be below the top of the wall so that's not visible from the public side. The whole idea is that it would just feel like an extension of the building to try to tie that in. We've also, out in front here, we've got those existing planters and such. Those would all remain. So again, trying to screen that area as much as possible from the public view. I think that's it for this floor. I'm not sure, Ben, if you had something.
No, those are the key components I think we talked about in general on that. So then we'll go up to the upper floor. Again, this has less changes with the addition going forward. So again, on the left, same thing as our initial schematic design, and on the one on the right is the design development with that small bump out. I guess, and I can quickly talk through, there's two main things that happened on this that we looked at. So first of all, I want to highlight the area to the right. The sheriff mentioned this before, but talking about the long-term needs of dispatch. For the most part, we do quite a bit of the dispatching in Jefferson County, but we do have some communities that maybe they do it on their own part-time or full-time, etc. But as we begin to look at a lot of the grants out there, we know there's going to be a point that looking at should some areas be looked more centralized, or should be a backup more and more as well. And so point being is we want to make sure this was sized for the long term. And as you'll see on the south wall right here, Ron's team went through an exercise to make sure we could add up to 6 stations in dispatch to look at future needs and growth of the county for dispatching purposes specifically. So there's a little growth there that took place. The other part is dark blue. This is a shell right now. There's nothing really specifically designed to go there, again, about another 1,000 square feet. And so this was discussed at the Building and Grounds Committee initially and with the Finance Committee that should that even be there if there's not an immediate need for it. And so when our friends from Moss looked at it and they looked at the costing of it, to add that space right now, and we'll get to the total numbers, was about $150,000. If you look at construction numbers, to build 1,000 square feet, $150,000 in today's dollars, that's inexpensive space for the long-term needs of the county. So I think the committee's kind of looked at it. If we do move with this addition, it makes fiscal sense to also include this for future needs of the county for potential build-out in the future. Anything else you want to add on that, Ron, that I missed? All right. So now we mount to the final fun part. And that's really a discussion on the business terms. After we looked at the need, how we're meeting the needs with the design development, and what does that mean for numbers. And Anthony Moss is also here tonight to help make sure I don't miss anything, but it can help explain some of these numbers as well. And so some of this is going to be a rehash of what we went through the last time we met. So this first part was our initial budget for schematic design, and the base amount was about $36.32 million. That included a 10% contingency, which is about $2.7 million. This included all our soft costs. So that's everything from engineering costs to architect design costs to construction management fees. All that stuff is built into this number as well. It also included allowances for technology, audiovisual equipment, furniture, fixtures, all those things. So it's really trying to really look at almost a turnkey allowance placeholder kind of system. So this is, we knew what we were looking at overall. So that was about 36.3. This included, if you may recall from those discussion, getting us to present day values at that point in time, which included about another 8% increase at that point in time of inflation, along with some smaller scope item change at that point in time. So keep in mind that's present day, including some of that inflationary increase. For planning purposes, we also included as an exhibit 3 rates of potential inflation that could hit by the time as we try to plan. Our crystal ball inflation, as most of you are aware, it's pretty tough right now, understanding where these markets are going to go. So Moss Brothers included a 3%, which brought the total project to 37.4, a 6% inflation cost, 38.5, and then a 9% at $39.59 million. So what we just talked through between the additions, the outdoor space, and renovation of the space that was not going to be renovated additionally has a cost of about $850,000 to $900,000. So this is one of the drivers of why we're in front of the board tonight, because obviously this is not a small, simple scope change order related to the overall budget. And so without moving, this definitely needed input by the board before we move forward. What this does also include, because we anticipated this question, is there's a factor of inflation also built into this as well. So this is not $850,000, $900,000 plus 9%. There's a level of inflation that has already been built into this number once we move forward. So that, with that 9% inflation, this big number up top here that could change to, with this, brings this project to potentially be about $40.49 million based on present estimates that we can best assess. So a couple items of note from the other budget side of this end. The county board has allocated up to $43 million at present time towards this project. Now, granted, our goal is to keep moving that number down. So the first line was up to $36 million of bonding authority. The board, based on the recommendation of the Finance Executive Committee, have also allocated $7 million of American Rescue Plan Act towards this project. Staff has been directed to also look at some other potential options and bring back recommendations if we can use additional American Rescue Plan Act dollars for this project with other priorities of the county for a future conversation piece. The other analysis that we will be looking through as part of carryover process is to look at things of those soft costs or FFE, furniture and fixtures, that we can pay maybe as part of our capital budget process or carryover budget. So we're paying cash today for it versus using bonded money. So an example is looking at specifically furniture and technology. Technology, we don't necessarily be bonding a whole lot for that, understanding that technology can move quickly. And so we want to make sure we understand that replacement value going forward from a capital asset. So very gross estimate is that's another about 1.5 to 2 million of costs that might be reduced from these numbers here. It's not in addition to that number is included up top here already. We're just looking at ways can that be an alternative revenue source to help pay for this project. So Anthony, did I miss anything in that? Okay. So with that, Mr. Chair, we would like to open this up to any questions either for Ron, Anthony, the Sheriff's Department to look at this and answer any questions. And in part tonight, the question is why are we bringing it forward today? And so obviously there's a lot of design work that goes into this. And part of the reason we'd like to have guidance from the board of how we should move forward is the fact is we'd be asking Potter, Lawson, and Moss to design 2 buildings. So if we went with the schematic design, the original design, that is one system of plumbing, mechanical work, egress, etc. If we looked at the design development phase, that's a totally different design building. And so to be efficient of how we're going to do this and effective, and also not having to pay for 2 designs to take place, is we like to make sure we're heading down the right path with either option going forward. And so that's part of the reason we like this before tonight, because we can continue to spend time to make this design, but we want to make sure it's in line with what the county board would like us to go down to. So, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Waymeyer. Do you have any questions for any of our consultants? Supervisor Winnicky.
Yeah, I think a simple question. You talk about 3%, 6%, 9%. Is that per year or per the length of the project?
This is based, and I'll let Anthony answer a little better, but it's based on the total cost of the project.
Thank you.
Those were 3 different scenarios from the last time I gave the budget until bid day, which is, I think we're shooting for May, June, July, somewhere there, depending on how design goes. So we don't know what inflation is going to do between now and then, and those are 3 different scenarios.
Other questions? Supervisor Brogler.
I understand and appreciate all of the future look about this, planning for the future. I get that. And everything that presented tonight makes total sense. But were there any things given up to counteract this increase? I'm just trying to remain true to myself when I said way back at the beginning that I was fine with the initial, but if it was going to keep increasing, I was not going to be in favor of it, excluding inflation. I get we have no control over that. But every time we meet, we continue to add, and I don't see anywhere that we're subtracting.
So up front, there was no, because of this addition, we took away a courtroom. That did not happen. Just because those other areas have already defined those needs, and the programming analysis justified those needs related to the space, programming needs, security needs, etc. I think what I want to make sure, and we talked about this a lot, and Ron has had the one-on-one meetings with the departments, is that we don't see it. There won't be an additional addition like this coming back to the county board. There might be some design things we have to work through, like I use the example of doors, that we have to look how we value engineer those. But looking ahead to the future, where we're at today, you're not going to all of a sudden say, by the way, we need another 1,000 square feet here. This is really part of that process as we move forward, moving between schematic design and design development. And maybe I can let Ron talk through that process a little bit more. And the conversations, quite honestly, that he's had with the staff and other stakeholders as part of this.
So, in regards to the magnitude of this, we foresee this now. We have met with all departments at least once. Moving forward, even, for example, today, we were still tweaking some spaces and moving some spaces around, but nothing that would impact cost. We don't foresee in the remainder of the design process anything of this magnitude coming forward. And we are, as we continue discussions with the different staffs in the different departments, we do try to look at ways to reduce costs. The doors was discussed. We were looking at, can we salvage it and reuse existing doors? Well, that could add up to over $150,000, for example, in this project. So we continue to look at ways like that to find ways as we move through this design process to try to save money. But at this time, we don't have a designated list and said, we've given up this and that. We do understand we have a budget to hit. And we will continue to continue to try and hit that number.
We've added almost $900,000.
We have.
And you talked about that courtroom, but that courtroom, if my math would be correct, that courtroom, that'd be 1.8 million because you'd lose the 900,000 of that plus the 900,000 we're adding. So we're continuing to make valid improvements, but we're also continuing to increase the costs, correct?
I guess the point I was trying to make, using the courtroom as an analogy, is the fact is there's some space we have to update and program for. And so we simply can't just say, because we're going to add here $900,000, there's an easy way to reduce $900,000 from value engineering without actually impacting other departments' space needs that they have going forward. And so it's not as simply a nice little give and take saying, well, we add here, now we cut here, unless it were, in many cases, we'd have to reduce square footage in other places of the building then that have been designed as well. And so that's the challenge of the give and take, especially when we have basically 3 different kinds of spaces we're trying to program around. We got the general office legislative space on this end, which is one design and functionality. We have the courtroom space, which by itself, not only because of the design of those courtrooms and the added neat things within the courtroom itself, example as protection, but it's also secured space behind for the staff. And then we move to the really expensive spaces, what we're talking about tonight, which is that correctional space needs. And quite honestly, the additional support needs that go with managing a jail with some of the needs that have been outlined. So I did not want to have to come to you all tonight and have this conversation, quite honestly, right? If we could have found a different way to do it. But I think also as we look and we talked with the committees is we know this is frustrating at this point in time, but it's also as we look long-term for the county, what would that space cost us 10 years from now if all of a sudden the sheriff comes back and says, by the way, we need this. what happens when we might have a change how DOC wants us to manage prisoners related to outdoor space. Jails is, quite frankly, one of our biggest liabilities as a county when we look at lawsuits trends across the country and our state. Not only and the care and safe being, because we have a fiduciary responsibility ultimately in the jail. We're responsible for hot in the cot, right? I mean, we're responsible for medical care. When they come to our facility, they lose their insurance, they lose badger care, et cetera, right? We have that sole cost is on the county. So trying to find ways to help manage that better is also important. So Supervisor Brocker, trust me, I did not want to come in because I knew the concerns about it. But with that being said, it kind of goes to what Sheriff brought forward. When the addition was done 30 plus years ago, I've always had urban legends of what got cut. You know, an example today we were talking about utility corridors that got reduced that from a maintenance standpoint are costly today. And so I think that's the policy question, budget question we want to bring before the board. Is this a smart decision for today, but also tomorrow? So that 10 years from now, the sheriff's not coming back saying, you know, you told us 5 years and it's 20 years later too. So that's part of this.
Supervisor Backlund has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to respond a little bit to this conversation too, because I was kind of taken back also. And part of it, I don't think we really understood as a committee, those bubbles were there, that the sheriff was identifying space, and they didn't really explain. I personally did not have a grasp of what those bubbles were for or what the space was for. It was just they needed added space. And so when we started talking on the south end of the building, and we said it's just too expensive for that space because all the utilities run through there, we removed that bubble, that square footage. And then the bubble moved to between the pod and the other building. And again, you know, it was like, we can't do that because of light. And again, that bubble got removed. And there was just, I hate to use the term, kind of falling through the cracks, but we just never added that space back in until now. When it comes up in the design development, it's like, okay, now this is what we needed that space for. Had I known before, obviously we wouldn't be having this discussion either. It would have been all in the budget. It would have been, I agree to you with the creep, but to be truthfully honest, the sheriff's department did ask for this space, but where they were asking for, we couldn't make it happen. And it just got dropped from the plans when it went back to the full board for voting on approval for it. So as a committee member, I kind of take responsibility for some of this. I agree 100%. My heart sank when I saw the numbers, but also understanding drugs and mental health are epidemics going on right now. Part of it, I think, is probably from the pandemic. People aren't coping well with being restricted at home and where they can and can't go, or where they can. And unfortunately, and I think like Ben said, you know, we are responsible for these people when they come into our facility, whether we like it or not, whether they've done something to themselves that have induced, you know, a high or a reckless behavior. And what do we do if we don't have the space to put them? We have no other jail cells or any other thing for a safe place to put them. So I'm with you on the finances. If we could have found something different, we would have done that. So anyhow, that's what I would like to say. Thank you.
Supervisor Schultz.
Yes. First, I'd like to compliment Supervisor Brogler and others who are questioning. That's our job. That's our job. But I also want to thank Sheriff Milbrath and Captain Gray for the presentation that they made. As I was sitting there, I was thinking about several years ago. I've been on Police and Fire Commission in Fort Atkinson for a long time. Several years ago, I literally had a man, he was not joking, ask me, we don't have drunks letting themselves into jail cells, do we? And I thought he was joking. He wasn't. There is a huge misunderstanding of what the sheriff's department is dealing with on a daily basis. And look to cut this back if you want, if you really think it's going to start getting better. But I can't even imagine somebody thinking that way. It's not going to get better. This is a job that screens out for doing it right the first time. This is a job that screams out for doing it right the first time. And it's a lot of money to spend, I know, and I respect people who question, and, you know, I wish I had more attention to detail, you know, as some do. And I think that's fine, but in the end, remember, and don't forget, this job needs to be done right. What the sheriff's department is dealing with on a daily basis is not going to get better.
Any other questions? Supervisor Johns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a comment on the requests and of the sheriff and the associates. My wife was a social worker for the county here for 25 years, working with adolescents. And in those 25 years, I would say that, well, she could say, the number of children coming from families with mental health issues and then growing out of the system and then ending up in not the best way in their lives. And I really think that this points to the fact that this addition and the need for this points to the need for more help for mental health. When you have a mental health issue, you can't see it. It's not like you have a broken leg or a broken arm. You can't see it, but it shows up. And these folks need as much help as possible, and that's what Human Services does over on the other side of town, with a couple of hundred employees over there trying to help people in this county do better. And so when a few hundred of them come through the jails over here, and they're probably mostly in dire need of mental health services. And I think the best we can do is give them that help, where it's not a warehouse we're doing over here. We're trying to get these people better citizens on the way out, and treated fairly while they're incarcerated, so that they maybe can get a little bit of help and a little bit of help and a little bit of help. It's like somebody once said, you know, every child, if there's one person that believes in that child, it can make all the difference in the world. And maybe one person will walk in that jail and help one inmate get better. And through that, we succeed. So I understand the cost, but we live in a culture, we live in a society where we do take care of each other, and it's best to take care of each other when we're in trouble. So I move to approve this if we can.
Just so you know, there's no vote on this evening. Any other questions? Supervisor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't quite understand how this affects our contingency for the project as a whole. Are we taking this out of the existing contingency? Are we adding contingency at the same rate for this additional cost? And what happens when we use up our contingency?
So the way this is set up right now is this is not going to be 900,000 minus at $2.7 million. That's not how this would be set up to be. At $2.7 million would still be there. What we'd be really looking at is that delta of what we've reserved from the county already, which is about $43 million, minus the total cost of the project. So including this addition, the total project cost is up to about $40.49 million based on current estimates with the total turnkey operation. It kind of goes back to our intent when we added as a recommendation and approved by the board was we included the ARPA dollars was really trying to drive down how much we had to borrow. That's ultimately came down to be, right? And that was one of the biggest goals we had. Under this current scenario, if we take what we've reserved, then we minus the updated budget out, what that means is we can still drive down that 36 million by about $2.5 million of what we don't have to bond for, assuming these numbers don't change. That's assuming we use the whole 2.7 million in contingency on top of that too, by the way. So kind of working back up from the bottom up, the dollars are there from what you've reserved. We would not be asking for additional authorization. It would change what maybe we could reduce the borrowing. That's already been approved.
But our contingency now is under the 10%, correct?
Yeah, it's two. So the actual hard cost of the construction is about $27 million. So the 10% is based on the actual hard cost of construction of about $27 million. So that's the $2.7 million. Here, let me quick. So this is a sheet. This is how it was built last time, right? And so kind of quickly going through it again. So we had a hard of about 27.6 for the main project. Then we had the construction of the parking lot demo across the street where MIS is right now, and the sheriff's parks a lot of their vehicles. And then the 10% put in there, and that got us up to that $30.5 million. All the soft costs, along with allowances, is what brought it up to about that $36.3 million. So you had $2.6 million in design fees right here, plus the roughly $3 million right here. That got you up to that $36.3 million, and then all these dollars with the inflation we just talked about.
Any other questions? Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said that we weren't going to take an action on this tonight, although it does indicate on the agenda item and possible action. Without taking action tonight, we're looking at the February meeting, I guess, and you can straighten me out on this, and then probably be some refinement of the plan and the numbers and so on between now and then. Is that what we're looking at? And is delaying it causing us any trouble?
I think the language action was put on there in case someone would like to support it. There's a whole variety of motions that if a board member would be appropriate, it could be approving this concept in general. It could even go down the point of saying this is the cap on the project cost, etc. But I don't know if you want to talk through that any more of what could take place under action if a board member so choose.
When this agenda was first put together, there was no action designated. It was just discussion, and then Ben and I talked about it a little bit more, thinking that it would be a good idea to put an action item or an action option for the county board on this in the event action was to be taken or the county board wanted to be taken. The idea was that this is a big addition to the project, and that if the county wanted to go in this direction, it would be best if the county board specifically approved this addition so that there was a clear record that the project was expanded to this degree versus just saying, well, we can acquire the funds through the previous county board action. Let's use that method. I think that it's best that if there at some point, whether it's tonight or a different night, that action be taken by the county board endorsing the additions that have been discussed tonight.
Thank you for that explanations. That's originally when we had our last meeting, our joint meeting, we kind of talked about just presenting and let people have a chance to digest this ahead of time. But if we want to have action tonight, that's fine by me as well too. Supervisor Christensen.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, is there going to be a problem if we put it off till February?
It would slow some things down, and which could push back then as a result when items are bid for, which could have impacts potentially then how is inflation incorporated. So.
Any other questions? Other questions? Would somebody like to bring forth a motion to approve? Or Supervisor Martin?
Actually, I have a question, Mr. Chairman. If we decide to do a motion with the cap, how might that, a cap on spending, how might that be phrased or whatever?
Want to address that?
Okay. So toss out some potential ideas. So there could be a motion that supports the addition of the law enforcement jail expansion, and farther, that motion shall read, the price of this total product shall not exceed X. So an example, we did do that with the highway shop where I was given specific parameters. We had the same conversation with certain things that increased during the course of that project. And then that was also a trigger point if things exceeded that point that the committees would have to recommend something coming back to the county board for final approval. As a process standpoint, keep in mind when all the bids do come in, the board does approve all those bids. So you have a very firm understanding of what those bids are going to look like. That will also be a trigger point with Moth Brothers when we enter into what's called a guaranteed maximum price contract as part of a construction management contract, which helps hold those costs in place as best as we can.
Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to approve the LEC jail expansion as presented.
Do I have a second? Second. Second from Supervisor Schultz. Any discussion on that resolution? Supervisor Brogler.
I just want everybody to totally understand what I've been saying this evening. I'm not against any of the changes. I totally agree with the idea of planning for the future. And I realize this has been a massive cost, and it will continue to be. But I also want everybody to remember that I said if it passed a certain point that I wouldn't approve it. Not that I'm against the project, I'm against the financial aspect that we're throwing back to the taxpayers at what's already a difficult time. So I know it's going to pass, and I'm glad for that, but I'm also going to vote against it in keeping with what I said a couple months ago.
Anybody else? Questions, comments? Audrey, I think we will have a roll call vote here. Would you like to restate that for us, Supervisor Christensen?
Yes, I believe what I said was I move to approve the LEC jail expansion as presented.
Supervisor Christensen, would that include the financial part of this presentation or the plan as presented? So we're not just talking about the addition, we're talking about the funding to construct the addition as that has been presented tonight in the amount that has been presented tonight. Would that be correct?
Yes, the amount of $900,000 could be included in that, but I didn't seek a cap. A total. I wasn't looking for a total cap, but I would include that $900,000 as presented.
Okay.
Is that clear to everybody?
Have to be 2/3.
I do not believe in 2/3. It's a simple majority. It's a budget amendment. Majority, simple majority. We will do a roll call vote then.
Supervisor David?
No.
Supervisor Herbst?
Supervisor Herbst.
Yes.
Supervisor Payne?
Yes.
Supervisor Backlund?
Yes.
There are 24 yes, 3 no, and 3 absent.
Thank you, everybody. That takes us to end reports. Oh, excuse me, comment. Is there any public comment pertaining to the budget or pertaining to issues on the floor here? Seeing none, we'll go on to annual reports. Clerk of Courts, Ms. Inca.
Good evening, and thank you for a few moments of time to talk about the Clerk of Court's office. I want to start by saying that this is a rescheduled annual report. My father passed away a few days before the presentation was originally scheduled in August. When I reached out to Ben to tell him about my situation without hesitation or delay, he told me to attend to my family and that this would be rescheduled as time allows. For that, I thank you and my family thanks you. A report of statistical and financial information was distributed before the August meeting. An abbreviated summary of where the Clerk of Court's office is currently is that we're still in pandemic recovery. The impact of the pandemic on the Clerk of Court's office is what I would describe as a survival marathon. We're used to the trials and tribulations of high-profile cases, law changes, technology changes, staffing shortages, and the like. And like every other office in the building, we worked hard to continue functionality with all the normal impediments, including the pandemic. We didn't shut down a single day. We were not able to convert to work remotely. The courts are open and mostly public. The court system in Jefferson County continued to function, and we strove daily to adapt and overcome every time the rules changed. There was a lot of big picture, out-of-the-box thinking that resulted in adapting and overcoming those challenges. And because of that, the system as a whole is further in recovery than a lot of other counties in the state. Moving forward, the challenges that we face as a department continue to be the same as prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic. How to safely conduct in-person jury trials and evidentiary hearings, how to recruit staff in a very difficult job market, including safely interviewing and training new staff. Responding to upcoming interfaces coming from CCAP and legislative changes. Responding to the ever-changing role of technology in the courtrooms, and finding staff and time to prepare for the remodel. This includes purging cases that have met Supreme Court rule retention and scanning files for long-term retention consistent with Supreme Court rule standards. I'm very focused on moving retention and purging to be a priority, understanding that we only want to move what we have to once the building is remodeled. If anyone has questions, I'm glad to answer.
Questions? Questions from the board? Any hands up? Don't see any? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then we have emergency management, Ms. Holcomb.
Good evening. Our focus shifted quite a bit in 2020 and 2021. We spent many weeks organizing, ordering, separating, distributing personal protective equipment for law enforcement, fire, EMS, long-term care facilities, hospitals, nursing homes, and many other facilities that provide care for their clients. One of the things that I would like to do is to thank Amy from the Fair Park. They provided the space for us to do all this work, and if it wasn't for them, it would have been very difficult. We also worked regularly with the National Guard, coordinating and setting up COVID testing sites. Again, thank you for Amy for the Fair Park. Thank Kevin Weissman for the Parks Department, and then also Paul Vogel at Health and Human Services for helping with that. As my report reflects, we completed our plan of work with the state, which puts Jefferson County in a safer place, and we received our grant funding accordingly. We continue to buy and remove structures in the floodplain for life safety and to reduce property damage. And then EM also continues to work on many plans to help improve our response to our emergency or our disaster. Some of those plans include like a debris management plan, volunteer management plans, damage assessment teams, emergency fuel plans, donations management plans, and I've got a couple others. There is much to accomplish to complete the duties of our office, and with only 1.6 employees, we continue to have our work cut out for us. If you ever have any questions or are interested in something I can help you with, I welcome your interest and appreciate your support. And I will miss the county board supervisors that are not coming back.
Questions for Ms. Holcomb? Questions? Questions? Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
Which takes us to Item 11, Planning and Zoning Committee, Supervisor Jacob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Report to the honorable members of Jefferson County Board of Supervisors. Jefferson County Planning and Zoning Committee, having considered petitions to amend the official zoning map of Jefferson County, filed for public hearing held on December 16, 2021, as required by law pursuant to Wisconsin statutes, notice thereof having been given and duly advised of the wishes of the town boards and persons in the affected area, hereby makes the following recommendations. Approval of petitions as listed, dated this third day of January 2022, Blaine Paulson, Secretary. And that moves on to ordinance number 2021-15, amending the official zoning map of Jefferson County. Has been petitioned to amend it. Petitions as listed. I move for approval of this ordinance.
Second.
Any questions? Questions concerning the ordinance? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Excuse me, Supervisor Kennard is abstaining. Sorry, I didn't give you a chance there, John. My apologies. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the ordinance passes. Supervisor Jacob.
Ordinance 2021-16, amending Jefferson County zoning ordinance. The Jefferson County Comprehensive Plan and Farmland Preservation Plan were updated and approved by Jefferson County Board of Supervisors on January 12, 2021. Following the updates of these plans, Jefferson County zoning ordinance was reviewed for any necessary changes based on Comprehensive Plan and Farmland Preservation Plan updates, as well as other changes identified by residents, staff, and the Planning and Zoning Committee. After review by the Planning and Zoning Committee, the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance were sent to all 16 towns within Jefferson County for their review and recommendations to the Planning and Zoning Committee and County Board. A majority of the 16 towns subject to the county zoning must approve the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance before the zoning ordinance can officially be amended. As of January 3rd, 2022, 12 towns have approved the proposed zoning ordinance amendments, and one town is expected to approve the amendments before the end of January 2022. A public hearing was held on the proposed amendments on December 16, 2021. The Planning and Zoning Committee reviewed the proposed amendments on January 3rd, 2022, and recommended forwarding this ordinance to the County Board of Supervisors to adopt the amendments to Jefferson County Ordinance as indicated below. As you see on the next several pages, there is several lines that were crossed out and changed to accommodate this. I have moved for adoption of this ordinance.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Falker. Questions? Discussion? Supervisor Smith.
I don't see anything in here about changing or adding something to our zoning ordinances which would allow unique properties to hold small gatherings as to, say, the castle, or how this might affect, or, what we're not doing now to make changes that would have a positive impact to our zoning ordinances. To think that we're going to leave the problem to our attorney to solve, somehow creating or having a newly built structure fit into a ordinance designed for old barns. To me, our job, or zoning's job, would be to create something new in our zoning ordinance, and I don't see that happening here. So I can just say I'm very disappointed in zoning, and I think we need to address this issue, because the way we're going about it, I can't help but think we're just going to create a bunch of problems for future boards and continue to waste more time.
That particular issue is not part of this zoning update, but I will let Mr. Zango further elaborate.
Thank you.
Sure. This zoning amendment that's in front of you tonight was started about a year ago to date. So these amendments do take some time to work through. Where we were at a year ago, we did not have the discussion of the castle ongoing. Moving forward, the Planning and Zoning Committee at the December meeting held in January, they did begin reviewing that topic, and we'll be continuing to review it in the coming months. Theoretically, if it proceeds forward, that would then be to the county board later this year. So unfortunately, the process does take some time. However, the Planning and Zoning Committee is reviewing options on addressing that issue.
Just so you understand this, Supervisor Smith, that particular issue came up long after this was already approved, sent to the townships. Now the process starts over again for that issue, basically. And it is being addressed by the zoning committee. Supervisor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 7, there's language change regarding solid waste disposal operations, junk salvage, or wrecking yards. What's not shown on this particular page is additional language. What's shown is verbiage that's being crossed off. It's my understanding in talking with Mr. Zangle that the additional information with regards to the exemptions based on the lot sizes and the square footage there are fashioned after Portage County's ordinance. A question that I have is their ordinance also, if this is the current one that's posted on their website, they also have in their language industrial waste, demolition waste, and construction waste material included. Would that be included in this the way that it's currently worded? Thank you.
Mr. Zangle?
So if I understand your question correctly, it is if industrial waste is covered under this section of the ordinance? Generally speaking, I would say yes. Somehow we would fit it into this definition as is. It's a question that hasn't come up yet, so I would need some more time to research it. I would look to Blair, Attorney Ward, if you have any insight into that. Industrial waste is not something that comes up frequently. It's not something I've had to deal with or place in the zoning ordinance. I could see it fitting in this section. I guess it would also depend upon how industrial waste is being used and in what tense or what method we're using it in as to where it would possibly fit into the zoning ordinance.
Other Supervisor Payne had a hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question regarding the first section with the size of the garages. It's changed from a maximum of 15, maximum height of 15 feet to 18 feet. And then it's a maximum size of 1,000 square feet. Is there anything in our ordinance in another section, or can we put something in here regarding the size of the property? Is there a minimum size of property that you have to have in order to have the garage size of 1,000 square feet? 1,000 square feet for 2 stories is 2,000 square feet. That's the size of a standard house. So if you have a small piece of land and you're putting a garage on that's the size of a house, you know, that doesn't seem very conducive for some neighborhoods to have basically 2 houses on a small piece of property. So how is that being addressed?
You want to handle that one?
Sure. So there is a maximum lot coverage that would somewhat cover what you were requesting. in certain zoning districts that would be applicable to where this definition would fit into. Individuals are limited in how much lot coverage for buildings they can have, including any detached structures or principal uses, single-family homes. So they're limited up to 30% of their total lot coverage for any buildings.
And also setbacks would limit.
Yep.
Other
And then the
questions?
setback,
Go ahead. Supervisor Payne, go ahead.
my apologies. So the setbacks are in another section that define how far they have to be away from the property lines?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Supervisor Kennard.
Yeah, I got a question on page 7, the lot width, the changing in verbiage there. I guess parcel must maintain required width for the distance of the required lot depth. I'm wondering, what does that mean?
Mr. Zango.
That is to clarify that a lot must have an area within the lot that has the minimum lot width and the minimum lot depth. There was some, yep, anywhere in the lot. There was the verbiage at strike made it clear that the lot width is measured at the end of the setback, which got us in trouble in some instances with some proposed lot designs.
Other questions? Other questions? Seeing none, all in favor of this ordinance, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the ordinance passes. Which takes us to public comment. I believe Supervisor Martin, you were signed up for public comment of a general nature? Or is that a different?
No, different committee.
Oh, that was a different committee meeting. Oh, okay. Announcements. Anybody want to discuss this? Does it, as far as being able to putting in your per diem rather than the sign-in sheet, does anybody have any questions concerning that? Because our IT people were here earlier. Are they still here? Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Waymire.
So this is a little cheat sheet to help you through this process. Obviously, continue to reach out to Tammy in my office along with John and his team over at MIS. They're going to continue the month of January trying to get to most of the committee meetings. So if you have your device, they will help you through the process of getting it to operate and going forward. I also know we've had a couple questions recently about just the differences when you're in room versus out of room related to like voting and things like that. So if you have any questions because you might be remote versus being in person, we'll help you through that process as well. So anyhow, we tried it. I shouldn't say we because Tammy worked on this along with some of the other members, and we had some board members help with critiquing it to make sure it was understandable. So we appreciate that effort. But if you have any questions or feedback, let us know, and we'll try. We want to make this as smooth and painless as possible for you as well as the staff. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other announcements? Any other announcements of general nature? Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All, not debatable. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Hearing none, we are